we're visiting with Michael Gerry in his home studio to talk about his approach to art, the kinds of things that are important to him, the kinds of themes, something about his style as well. And Michael just completed a book that involves paintings of the neighborhood where he lives and whole ideas around that. So that's give us a sense for your book.
Yeah, well, you know, in essentially I'm a painter, and when I travel I paint. So in the travels I'm doing a lot of plein air painting as well as teaching others how to plein air paint in different locations around the world. Sometimes when I get back from these trips I might develop a painting from a photograph. So if we look, like for instance, if we look over here, I was in Paris and I was just taking a walk, and as I walked along I saw a scene that reminded me of a very famous painting by an artist named Gustave Caillebotte. So in tribute to Caillebotte, I created this painting from the photograph. I made a few changes here and there, and this is where I left it. But my concern here was composition and design, essentially, which was based on diagonals, cutting through the picture plane, insertion of colors, these blues coming up, and these more local colors of the buildings, these tan colors coming down. So it's based on these kind of interlocking shapes and colors. The figures were essential to the scene, and I placed them where I felt that they were. So for instance, in the photograph, this isn't there. The only thing that really was in the photograph was these figures here. This is all made up. So is this. And here I put a sign with Caillebotte's part of his last name.
As a kind of joke?
As a tribute, yes, which it was intended to be a tribute.
When we talk about your work, the concept of temperature is very important.
Yes.
And how does that reveal itself here? Because that's to do with the mood of the work and aspects of color.
Yeah, again, temperature is easier to read when I'm there rather than in a photograph. Mm-hmm. In a photograph, you can understand an awful lot. You can look at the shadows, and you can look at how the distance of the shadows, the length of the shadows. You can understand where the light is, and so you're gaining a lot of information from the photograph. But you have to make it work. You have to put it to use.
So temperature, you
temperature,
temperature.
Okay, well, I mean, temperature is about basically color and value mixed together. So you've got a value relationships from dark to light, and you've got this business of what color is that value, and you bring it together, and we call that color tone or temperature.
And it relates to warm, cool.
Absolutely, yeah. Or even high key, in other words, intense, or less intense.
Mm-hmm. So
absolutely.
Warm and cool, and more intense and less intense.
Yeah, and the saturation thereof, right? So there's issues around that. It plays a big role because I'm always trying to understand not just the light on things, but the temperature of things. So you have to understand light, and even then within that relationship, there's quite a difference between what your eye will see, even if we're both seeing warm and cold correctly. Your eye might see blue-green, and my eye might see green-blue. Okay, so it could be slightly variance.
So this is something that now this temperature concept for people who aren't artists can be quite novel. Temperature is something also that you're experiencing as you look at the scene and as you do your painting. It's an experienced quality. It's not just a thought-out quality. You feel the temperature.
I think one has to be conscious to be aware of temperature. I don't think I've been painting a long time, so it's sort of a little bit part of my way of life, but I don't think a non-painter necessarily thinks in terms of in their daily life. They don't go around being aware of temperature.
Well, I remember when you came back from Africa a long time ago, and you showed the Atlantic studio the photographs of your trip.
Yeah.
Well, the photographs I'm seeing, and I'm looking at a lot of the women who were wearing these incredible, colorful dresses was a major color quality, and I wouldn't notice that at all if I'd walked around in the same scene. And it woke me up to the fact that artists look at things differently. They're responding to visual qualities that those of us who are not artists won't necessarily notice.
Right.
Temperature being among them. and you're aware of it. You're
Yeah,
tuned to it.
but I'm going to make it, I think a lot, okay, I'm going to make a distinction between temperature and color. Color is one thing. So I think most people walk around, and if they're walking down the street and they see something bright red, they'll notice it and they'll look at it. They might have a thought about it. Or if they see something that's a strange juxtaposition of colors. I mean, advertising uses this all the time to get our attention. Okay, so it's
there.
It's very much as a visual element. Color plays, perhaps it's the most, they call it the seductress, because it seduces you, because you do look at it, and that's talking about Joe Normal. For an artist, that's not temperature. A temperature is me saying, let's take white, for example, and I'm looking at a white wall and being able to see if that white is not just a grade white or a pure white, a light, but is it a yellow white? Is it a blue white? Is it a green blue white? Is it a violet white? What's happening as a result of the light and the conditions around the room to affect that? So the artist, but that's under the domain of the painter. The painter would be studying those things.
The sources of light and relations among the things, casting shadows.
The reflected light, everything can play a role on the temperature of color, okay, or non-color.
You see, in psychology, when people classically in all these experiments, they'll show a person a shape or they'll show a person a color, but they never realize that in the real world, it's this color and this color affecting each other.
Absolutely.
And it's not that. That's one of the reasons for doing this work in aesthetics, is to draw people's attention to the fact that what we see is an interaction of a lot of cast shadows and a lot of sources of light and a lot of interactions among colors.
That's right.
We don't normally think about it. You guys do.
Oh, sure, of course. You know, I mean, it's certainly an interest of mine, and I'll show you more of that, how that plays a role in the paintings in the studio.
Shall we move to the studio? Let's move to the studio. Okay, so Michael, inside your house, we were talking about things like temperature, experience of temperature, the kinds of compositions you choose, the difference between working from a photograph and working from a painting. Now we're in your studio where you have a whole series of smaller pieces based on your neighborhood project.
Right. Well,
so tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I think that when we were looking at that, so I said that piece that was the Kaibo tribute was really one of the last paintings that I did. I found that painting these scenes from other places, which I've been doing all my life, did not really have a lot of. I mean, they were always formal issues in them that I enjoyed, and I took great pleasure in painting and figuring out those formal issues, because painting is painting. But I wanted there to be a little bit more of an emotional tie to the work than just the formal. So I thought to myself, and as I traveled, I thought, really what I really want to do is be able to bring the same kind of enthusiasm and excitement, visual excitement, to my own neighborhood as I had when I was traveling. So what happened is when I got home, I thought, okay, I'm going to start going out, and I'm going to take my camera, and I'm going to just take my camera where I have to go, whether I have to walk up the street or whether I have to go shopping. I'm going to always take my camera. And it got me out for more walks, which was good. So what happened is I started to develop some, take photos, and as I walked along, I thought after a while, I thought I need to put figures in these, because really the neighborhood, which I've lived in for 35 years, and I had a feeling for, and I've watched change, not necessarily only for the better, but very much for the worse.
You've talked about gentrification.
The gentrification, exactly. It's so the book became a little bit about my observations of the changing neighborhood, the gradual gentrification and the changing demographics of the neighborhood. So what you're seeing here is scenes that are really within blocks, for the most part, of my house. And
this is primarily the Roncesvalles area in Toronto, is an Eastern European neighborhood.
That's right. This is Parkdale, or Roncesvalles Parkdale area in Toronto, and it's principally been, as it's been gentrified, it's moved from a principally Polish neighborhood to a mixed, younger family, young children, and people who want to be close to
So
downtown.
tell us about some of the stylistic decisions or some of the challenges you faced in doing these works.
Okay, yeah, there was quite a few. Firstly, I am working from photographs. The photographs are just a reference, but an important one, and sometimes I'll move figures to satisfy compositional concerns, and sometimes I'm lucky and I don't have to move them that much.
But these are scenes you also know. I mean, in the Paris scene, you observed it and then you left and had just the photograph. Here, you're still walking around through the neighborhood, and you know, time and time again, you build up an image and understanding of the neighborhood. So even though it's from photographs, you got that extra information from passing through it on an ongoing basis.
Absolutely. There's times when I'm in the middle of a painting. Let me see if there's one here, for example. Well, not so much in this one, but I could use any, you know. I know I've walked this space many times. So when I'm painting it, I can feel it and I can understand it. Whereas if I was painting a scene from a photograph that I had no knowledge of, I wouldn't be able to bring that much to it. That information that I gained through traveling it on my own makes a big difference.
Now, what are the interesting things about style here that you would consider your signature, so to speak?
I wouldn't
It's
call
distinctive to what you do.
Well, I mean, composition choices are always somewhat distinctive. Some of them are kind of more formal that a lot of people agree on, or the standard compositional principles that most artists are always going to use. And then there's the variations that are going to come from the individual artist and what they're trying to do.
When it's very quickly, what is the meaning
All
of
right,
very quickly?
so I'll give you an example. These paintings, these three paintings here in the corner here, I did in one day, in probably maybe 4 or 5 hours. But in contrast to that, in my book, as I'm part of my book is there's a section that shows the millions of variations. I put this one up so you can take a look. This is this is not going to be in the book as such, but underneath there's so much paint on here that if you looked at the side, you'd see a ton of paint.
Wow!
Right?
Built up.
Yeah, built up. So this painting had. And
many iterations.
Oh, it had about 60 different ones with different figures in different positions, and 4 figures, then 3, then back to
now,
4.
When do you decide to stop? Because I know how difficult it is.
You know, when you either get sick of it,
or you feel
like you've arrived. Yeah, exactly.
And I quite fond of this painting here of the people in the restaurant.
Yeah, well, this is the interior of Airy's restaurant, where I used to take my kids for dinner all the time when I was living above it. So I have connections to these places. The personal connection with this is that it was a refuge for me at the end of a long day of work, and I took my kids there to eat all the time. It was right below my apartment upstairs. And
so you feel a kind of relationship with each of these works because you've experienced them.
Yeah. Exactly. There's stories that go along. Like these two characters represent the hipsters, young hipsters with the baby carriage that have moved into the neighborhood. I did that, you know. My concern here is, and I'm painting it, and you know, my thought is, as I go by, is will this marriage last?
Let's hope for the best. And one of the things we have in Toronto, very interesting, there are a lot of opportunities for alley paintings. Like this one over here, I'm presuming is a kind of alley.
No,
painting.
It's not.
It's a sidewalk.
It's a sidewalk
street with a lot of snow on it.
Yeah, it's going down. There's the church, St. Helens, and it's going down the hill at Lansdowne. And there's all these hills everywhere. You can see these slopes here. So that painting over there is going down, seen on a snowy day before they plowed the snow. But it was sunny out, and so you talked earlier about temperature. You know, I really heightened the blue on this temperature here, and I heightened the blue on this. So you know, in this case, it's not just temperature, but the intensity of the saturation of that temperature is very high, very extreme. Whereas in other ones, they're relatively neutral.
Now, these decisions emerge as you're working on it, or you decide real fast at the front end?
They're all about the light and the temperature of the day, and how I felt about the temperature of the day, and what I can read from the photograph. I mean, I'm not completely making it up, because one of the reasons I took the photograph is because I like the temperature. So I'm already, being aware of that.
relationship.
Yeah, it's not, and of course, the design in each one of them is very, very important to me. The relationship of scale from that to that, the divisions, where I put that in, all of these things are.
Can one say that which one is more important to you, or one can't say it? The composition or the temperature?
No,
Or
no,
which one comes first?
It's composition, absolutely. The breakup of the picture plane is always the most important thing. It's all about the design. So the design is your choices as to how you are formally changing, breaking up that. It's true of photography, and it's true of any visual
in
art.
psychology, the first thing that the brain decides is actually linear versus painterly, in the sense of edges emerging and shapes emerging. Composition is how one places the shapes. It's a second order concern. But in psychology, we talk about the fact, what does the brain do? Well, the brain takes noise and it begins to have things come forward and begins to put lines around them. Well, you guys do that, but in a coherent way that we call art. But you're saying the space comes before the color. You find the same thing with the brain. The brain makes those decisions first.
But I will make a distinction between the word space and design. I think they're two different things. When we talk about design, it's interesting how the word certainly in the world of painting over history has changed from composition to design. So that composition, as we think of it in 16th, 17th, 14th century art, is also about those choices about breaking up the picture plane, but it also includes the idea of walking through the picture plane. Design, which is more of a 20th century and 21st century word that we use all the time, the Ontario College of Art and Design, as if it's changed. What happened in the 21st century is there's much more awareness of the flat picture plane. So design is how you cut up, like when I'm looking at the design of this work, I just talked about it. That's that relationship to that relationship, that relationship to that relationship. Maybe any diagonal thrusts that are either hidden, or within it.
So you're saying, one second, you're saying in the 21st century, the biggest concern
20th as well.
20th is with design, as in how one organizes two-dimensional space.
That's right. Two-dimensional plane.
Two-dimensional plane.
Plane, yeah.
And if you
So it would be like taking a wall and saying, where are we going to make a division on that wall? What's the height of that wall to the width of that wall? That's already concerned with design. So that's very, very important. When I'm making my biggest decisions right here, well, firstly, it's this shape to maybe some internal shapes, but within that, this to this is the number one division, is where that value to this is. That's number one. Number two might be where my placement of these big linear divisions within it. So those are about how am I fragmenting that square. Now, that's when I'm thinking of the design aspect, I'm thinking of that. When I'm thinking of the spatial area, that's when I'm thinking more in terms of, firstly, all the brushwork, sense of reflections, perspective, lines receding.
You're saying design decisions come first.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, one thing, as we're coming toward the end, one of the things I want to cover is your treatment of figures, because we've been talking about space, but figures are actually quite important in your work. Posture and gesture is important in your work. So tell us a little bit about how you approach that.
Well,
so many examples.
I'm working here very, very small. I'm punishing myself because it doesn't really suit my temperament. I'm very gestural. I'm not a slow painter. So what I really have to do here is, in terms of the figures, is really, I think, Gerald, you articulated it, is the idea of understanding the underlying structure of the figure and what it's doing, not necessarily what it looks like. So I have to read into the photograph.
You have a perfect example here of the woman carrying the tray.
Yeah.
The other woman is about to reach over the counter, or this woman pushing the pram, or these people in various stages of eating. I mean, just this small gesture over here. You're capturing in a very abbreviated way the essence of certain gestures that people are making.
Well, yeah, what I'm really doing is looking at the action, I'm looking at the photograph and I'm reading the underlying structure. Is the arm up? Is the elbow bent? Is the head tilted? Is it down? Where's the light coming from? You know, do I have to bring out that collarbone?
But you're also asking, what are they doing?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And which order here? Because you make a lot of formal decisions.
I mean, these figures in this case were in the photograph. I didn't have to make them up. So, you know, these aren't made up, and I might have changed one or two.
But you're getting a feeling for what they're doing and capturing that in their posture, etc.
Yeah, it's evident in the photograph if you look hard enough. If it's not there, you have to understand it.
So there's hidden gesture, so to speak. You may be gestural in the large movements you like to make, but there's hidden gesture in how you're capturing the figures.
Oh yeah, I mean, if I break it down, it's really pretty easy. There's like, you know, if I look at this figure, for example, I understand through my knowledge of form that, you know, the head is a volume and it's got light hitting this side of the volume, and the shoulder girdle has got a top and you know, and so on and so forth. So, and the elbow has a join. So I'm trying
It
to
all
do it.
becomes automatic because you have a lot of experience with it.
Yeah, of
You're not
course.
really consciously analyzing it necessarily in that situation. You capture it very quickly because of your knowledge and working.
Well, sometimes you have to slow down and say, what's going on there? I've got to get that structure right. There's a painting from the same series that isn't in the book here that I'm struggling with that might give you a better example of that. Here the figures are really, really small. So I have overpainted this 1,000,000 times already, and I'm trying to keep it fresh. But these figures, firstly, have gone through a transition of being much bigger to smaller. Their actions are changing. Some of their tones are changing. I'm still not happy with the way that arm has to come forward a little bit more. I know what he's doing, but we're trying to work it into a very tight space. I want to create a sense of space between that figure and that figure better than I have. I want to get a feeling of not just the light which was a very, very strong light, but I want to get a sense of the space between the figures and the air between the figures.
In a sense, these become like pictorial challenges.
Yes.
That's what they are. Each one is a pictorial challenge.
Absolutely,
for you.
absolutely.
So one can't say, well, he's done all this neighborhood stuff, you know, do something different. Each one is super different.
Well, they're all a painting problem.
So one of the things, the last thing I want to ask is this. In a certain sense, one imagines the artist a person who gets a great deal of pleasure from painting.
Yes.
And we've been talking about all the incredible challenges you face with each painting posing a certain kind of challenge or problem.
Right.
How does pleasure come from dealing with a challenge or problem? And you change them. You can change change this one 60 times, etc., etc. There can be frustration. Where's the pleasure in it?
It's
Is it
like,
in the looking? Is
you know,
it in the gesture?
no. It's in a combination of things. It would be paramount to doing crossword puzzles. I don't want to put it on a much higher plane than that. I get a lot of pleasure out of figuring this whole thing out. Firstly, like choosing a design that's pleasing. I get pleasure in that. Thinking about what makes a good design. Then the idea of moving paint around on a canvas, just actually moving it around is a very.
We talked about that with the reference to cave painters. They were taking a stick and they were making little moves.
Yeah.
The same pleasure.
Yeah,
in that
there's
originally.
a lot of tactile,
Yeah.
sensual pleasure in applying paint. You know, someone said to me once recently that, you know, they were painting from observation. They said, you know, I really should just be house painting because I get the real pleasure is just from putting paint on something. So, you know, but in my case, there's lots of things. It's sorting it out. It's trying to find the drawing, learning about drawing, coming up with occasionally in the studio, not every day, but once in a while with insights into drawing, feeling like you've learned something new. Each one is a puzzle. I mean, it's an indulgence, but it's great. And understanding more about nature, about light, I find that fascinating.
You find yourself still learning, so to speak, when you're outside looking at natural scenes, whether it's Sicily or Italy or
Yes.
walking around your neighborhood?
Yes.
And what kind of change, what are you noticing that like you noticed for the first time?
Well,
What does that mean?
it's not so much that what I'm noticing by walking around my neighborhood, But when I come to translate it into a painting, I put the two together. I put, my understanding of light gradually, being able to have, you're not always on when you're a painter. There's hits and misses all the time. It's not an exact science. So, I'll be working on a drawing of something, and for some reason I have an angle wrong. Okay, now I might, the next time I won't have any problem with that. So there's not necessarily always a consistency. Or you're applying a paint, and your temperament at the time is impulsive, and you slap the paint on impulsively. And as you do that, you think, wait a minute now, you're not really doing the work and the craft that you should be doing. So you gain insight into the more discipline. You gain insight into who you are, what's on your mind, where you should be. There's lots of self-knowledge that can be gained by observing your habits when you paint, or your successes or your failures and why they occur. And so in a way, it's not just the painting that can change, you're changing with it.